Good afternoon again. So, to continue the story where I left it off with the impending production of the play called Magus, it occurred, and the play was very well received by the 250, maybe, or so souls who saw it. Living up here in the woods, in the Catskill Mountains, the number of people who you could induce to come and see a play in a tiny theatre, an uncommercial play. 250 was about as many as we could expect to get, but they were a wonderful audience, and you could not possibly have better. If it had been seen by 250,000 people, it could scarcely have given more satisfaction to its author than those 250 gave. So I was left with potentially another play to write, another day, another play. It was never going to be a case of my wanting to write about experiences from my own life or from the lives of people I had known, let alone from the life of the body politic, because none of these were sources that excited me. And you might think that left me rather bereft of subjects. On the contrary, it left me with a much wider field, a much wider range of possibility than had I been trying to dramatize more, if you like, familiar things. But the things that are close and familiar to a writer simply emerge ventriloquized in other voices, just not in your own, and not in where your head is, as we now say, at. And in this case, my head could never have been at the subject that came to me, because it came in the manner of an obscure request. I'd had this happen to me actually before. Wonderful experience of one of the actresses in our little company who dreamt that I had written her a play for her, and she'd even dreamt the title. Well, more than that you cannot possibly ask. And the play that emerged from that I don't know that I really don't want this to be a process of my advertising my own work, but it was the most successful play that we did in our short run of a few years in appearing in that theatre. So what happened instead was, in fact, by way of a title, but a very different title from the one that the actress gave me to write. What happened was that my friend Henry, theatre director at the time, was directing a play of mine off Broadway, and he wrote to me saying he was unhappy because he had never directed a play that was a love story before. He'd never directed a love story. I found that totally implausible. I don't know that there are any plays in existence in the repertoire in the past or to come that are not love stories. I can't imagine any investigation of the human spirit that would not involve a love story. I mean, it could be a strangely expressed love, but without love, is there a story? I don't believe there could be. So in this letter he said what he wished was that if only he could be directing a play which featured a midget in a catsuit reciting Spinoza. So I thought, well, there's a challenge. And I sat down to write the play that was called, the title with which it began, Midget in a Catsuit Reciting Spinoza. Now, there were certain constraints, as there often are. You sit down to write something which have nothing to do with the intrinsic meaning of theatre or anything else. But in this case, we didn't have anyone who immediately qualified to play a midget in our little company, and I didn't want to deprive the company of a role that seemed likely to be an important one. They would not like to feel that somebody had been brought in from outside, as somebody could well have been. But it wasn't necessary, because I already knew somebody whose name was Midget rather than his description. His name was Alan Midget, with a E-T-T-E on the end of that, and his name derives from the Limousin in France. It's actually Migeot, and it ends in G-E-O-T, but the English adaptation of this is Midget. So in the play, we start as the curtain rises, so to speak, as the lights come up. We had no curtain. As the lights come up, Sir Arthur Midget is reciting Spinoza, very much what my friend Henry, the director, required. And he turns out to be a man who is an expert on Spinoza by profession, but who has a second string to his bow, which is that every winter he performs in a pantomime, the British Christmas vaudevilles, which are done every year, the same story, but differing in the nature of the celebrities who are invited to play the leading roles and bring in an audience. There are a whole list of pantomimes that are regularly done in this fashion, and the one in question here is the one about a cat. The celebrated cat belonging to a former, many years ago, I think 19th century, maybe 18th century, Lord Mayor of London, called Dick Whittington, and his famous cat who rids London of its rats, and that is the flimsy clothesline upon which is hung a multitude of humorous events in the London pantomimes of the winter. So that's his second role, and he's about to go on stage that's why he's wearing a catsuit, as required by the title. And he's about to go on stage and be dragged out of his contemplation of Spinoza, and he is brought onto the stage where he begins to remove his catsuit to reveal not Sir Arthur, the celebrated academic, but a man called Arnie Schwartz, who is inside the catsuit. In the uniform, British Army uniform of 1945, and he fetches a stool and sits himself down opposite a big man in a white uniform, who turns out to be Hermann Goering, who is desperate to get from Arnie his guard. Some means of suicide were at the Nuremberg trials, whereby Hermann Goering could escape the hangman, but Arnie wants to be well paid for this enterprise, and hopes that Goering has some Nazi gold, which Goering, alas, doesn't have, and so Arnie wonders, does he have some nice paintings, maybe, so that Arnie could sell? And after rejecting various candidates out of the vast quantity of famous old masters that Goering has stolen in the course of his Nazi career, Goering mentions that he has a Dali painting, painted specially for him, with the unusual title of Midget in a Catsuit reciting Spinoza. A Dali-esque title, like the one about the blind horse biting a telephone while destroying an automobile, something like that. It's a similar title. And in that spirit, I was able to persuade my wife, who is a brilliant artist, to paint a Dali pastiche that would correspond to that title, Midget in a Catsuit reciting Spinoza, because we meet the painting itself later in the play. It's a painting that he has made for Salvador Dali, his friend. This is going back in time into Goering's life, because this is this moment at which we meet Goering trying to bribe his guard to help him in his suicide. Is certainly the last moment in which we see Goering in the course of the play, but we see many earlier moments. And we meet Salvador Dali as he walks through Central Park and stops amazed beside a bench where he sees sitting on it an old bum of some kind in a hoodie, and a man who looks uncannily to him like the famous philosopher Spinoza. And he can't help approaching Spinoza and saying, "Excuse me, you may have had this said to you many times before, I apologize, but you look uncannily like," and Spinoza completes, "Baruch Spinoza, I know. The fact is, you won't believe this, but I am Baruch Spinoza." And the story that Spinoza tells is that he has been punished as a heretic by the city fathers of his native city and condemned to be the wandering Jew, the eternal Jew. And he's very, very bored by life, although his recital of the last 300 years is quite entertaining. Nevertheless, he's fed up, he just wants to die. And he can't achieve it. But he has now heard of somebody who might do it for him, this man called Hitler, who is attempting to kill all the Jews, and it is Spinoza's purpose to go and surrender to him in Germany to the Gestapo and be killed. That is his hope. And through a long and complicated story involving Hitler himself and Goering and Dali and a lovely American girl from Hoboken called Mary Jane, who fell in love with Hitler at first sight in the beer hall in Munich, where she first saw him, and has come to woo him, but with whom both Goering and Dali fall madly in love. So their story intersperses with the story of Spinoza's quest for death. And he, in fact, is in the antechamber to death. He's in Auschwitz when Dali sends Goering off to try and rescue him. Get him out of there, for goodness sake. And Dali has become a good friend of Spinoza. And so Goering, who doesn't really believe that he can possibly be Spinoza, brings the great Spinoza expert at the time, Carl Schmitt, also major, the primary Nazi ideologue, to Auschwitz with him to interrogate this supposed Spinoza, to prove that he can't possibly be Spinoza. And this enterprise is one in which Spinoza himself, who was dragged out from the prisoner population to meet Schmitt and Goering, is unable to fend for himself around this proposal, because he can't really even clearly remember what it was to be Spinoza, and Schmitt is pretty clear that he's not Spinoza. So Spinoza fails the test of being Spinoza. A scene I was longing to write once I saw that it could be in the wind, in the offing. And so off he goes, and the play appears to come to an end as characters all strip off their clothes in the changing room that is the overall set for the whole play. But they don't put on any clothes. They remain naked, and as they talk about the coffee they've been promised and looking forward to after the showers, suddenly the word showers takes on a hideous attribute, and we realize that we are not in a changing room. Moments later, the lights come down on these many naked bodies, and we are in the gas chamber. Something that few, if any, playwrights would ever want to write, a scene inside the gas chamber. You wouldn't want to write that. But bizarrely, I was required by this story that had been given me. I was required to write the black comedy of a scene inside the gas chamber in which you are there hoping that somebody will die, among a whole lot of people, none of whom want to die, and you don't want any of them to die, but you desperately want somehow Spinoza to survive, and he does. Or perhaps you want him desperately to die, and that's even more of a black comedy. Everybody dies. It's a horrific coup of choreography, a coup de théâtre of choreography. And alone is left Spinoza, standing there as the capo comes in to remove the bodies, and sees Spinoza with shock and says, "What are you doing here?" And Spinoza tries to explain, and the capo says, "Look, I'll be okay in my long underwear. You take my clothes." And you don't want to go through this again, do you? But become a capo, be a capo. So that extraordinary incarnation becomes the latest in the play of all the many incarnations of the wandering Jew, to be a capo in the camps, which had a terrifying fittingness for me to be left with. And all through the play, beginning with a man in the bum in the hoodie sitting next to Spinoza on the Central Park bench, who turns out to be Spinoza says, "I've got God going everywhere with me, making, watching out that I don't escape this punishment that's been given me." And he says, "You want to meet him?" And he nudges the old bum, who turns out indeed to be God, who appears in many, many guises, including that of Einstein at one point in the play. And his Spinoza's guard. And there at the end of the play, Spinoza comes up to the capo and says, "Look, are you God?" The capo says, "What? No, well, I'm God around here. So get your kit off, get your clothes off, and I'll give you mine, and we'll get on with this." It was extraordinary to find oneself writing the scene that no one could ever possibly want to put on stage, and writing it as a comedy. My poor darling actors, who were all ready to take their clothes off for the sake of the word Auschwitz acted as a charm, was wondering how we were going to rehearse this gradual, perhaps, process of undressing for a scene that had to be played naked, 15, 16 people naked on stage, climbing on top of each other. So that is where that darkness is what I was led to by the play. I didn't lead it anywhere, but it led me, and it taught me much, and it also taught me that I had perhaps allowed myself to go as far as could be required of any playwright seeking the intrinsic meaning of theatre. So thank you for listening. That was my journey, and whatever it is that I've learned about the essence of theatrical narrative was taught to me in these two plays, and I'm eternally grateful. Thank you for listening.